Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Karina Robinson, co-director of the Inclusion Initiative at the London School of Economics with Associate Professor, my wonderful colleague, Grace Lorden. This research centre at the LSE brings together behavioural science and data to create diverse and inclusive cultures. We're currently working on a number of fantastic projects, and they range from exploring how artificial intelligence can be used to promote inclusion in the workplace, to considering how luck versus effort is attributed across groups, to our good finance framework, which sets out 10 steps managers can follow to create a fair culture that promotes ability, actual ability. Now, do follow us on Twitter at LSE_TII or sign up to our newsletter. Directions on how to do that are being put in the chat box. This event is recorded, and do please pose your questions in the chat box from now onwards, really. Now, this is the 12th of our Open Door, Open City webinars. The name speaks for itself. We aim to open the door to the city and business to all talent and to make sure they're included. That's the best way to breed a culture of openness, innovation, productivity, and profitability. We're lucky to have as our guest Simona Paravani-Mellinghoff, who manages around $400 billion for BlackRock. Yes, you heard me right, 400 billion. BlackRock itself, of course, the biggest investment manager in the world. We're going to talk inclusion, her story, and the state of the world. Simona, a big welcome to Open Door, Open City.
Thank you for the invitation. I look forward to our dialogue today.
First, you need to explain your title, which is a mouthful, and if I didn't know what you did, I wouldn't. So explain to our viewers and listeners, you're Global Chief Investment Officer of Solutions for Multi-Asset Strategies and Solutions. What does that mean? What's your day job?
So if we take a narrow definition of my job, I have investment oversight, accountability for roughly 400 billion of multi-asset mandates that we are privileged to manage on behalf of our clients. And our clients are, for example, pension funds, university endowments, sovereign wealth funds. In practice, it means I need to make sure that we have the right talent, very topical given today's discussion, the right processes, but also the right control to ensure that we meet the outcomes that our clients need. On a deeper level, I would see my role as ensuring that I lead, enable, and empower my teams to help more and more people experience financial well-being. And financial well-being may mean different things to different people. So it can mean retiring with peace of mind. It can mean having the funds to fund scholarship for underprivileged kids. It may mean funding exciting research that can deliver exciting cures and treatments.
People would ask, do you actually choose assets that you invest in?
Well, I'm certainly responsible for how we deliver the processes and the structures whereby we decide where to invest in.
Now, you teach machine learning at UCL as, I think, as an industry professor for master's students. What does that actually involve? And presumably that is something you're also doing at BlackRock.
So being an industrial professor is first and foremost a great opportunity not to become a dinosaur, because being surrounded by clever minds that ask really interesting questions is the best way of not getting obsolete and become a dinosaur. I mean, concretely, what we do, we are part of the Faculty of Engineering, and we are teaching a dedicated course that helps people that come more from the engineering and quantitative side understand how techniques such as machine learning are concretely applied in fields such as finance.
Now, the young people you're meeting, do they have different priorities to my generation?
I believe they do, and they approach learning, they approach work in a different way, and I think this is another reason why my teaching position is actually also very relevant for my, let's call it, day job, because it helps me understand what matters and what motivates the younger talent.
Yeah, because I find it very interesting what you're saying, because so many people in the city, you can end up being surrounded by your peers. And meeting the young generation, especially in the way you're doing, it teaches you, I mean, what I've been finding about them is, they care much more about the planet, they care about purpose more, all these things where, interestingly, financial companies have been moving that way, but it helps to actually see it and experience it the way you are. Now, machine learning and AI, are they the same? People are worried that humans are going to become, expendable, and it's all about robots. There's a lot of fear. Can you just get rid of this fear for us?
So AI refers to a broad class of systems that effectively enables machine to mimic advanced human capabilities. That's the textbook definition. And there are use cases all around us. As an example, facial recognition, recommendations of music and books, they're all representation or use cases of AI. Machine learning is a subcomponent of artificial intelligence that it specifically deals with creating applications that enables computers to learn from data and experience. This is different than other ways that computers have learned, quote unquote, which has been more by having a set of program combinations and rules. As an example, Deep Blue, that was the first computer program to beat a chess champion in 1997, was not using machine learning, but a set of pre-program rules. The implication and the impact of artificial intelligence is going to be more and more far-reaching. And one of the reasons for this is quite simply that we are creating and able to process a bigger and bigger amount of data. As with any transformation, it's likely to create both challenges and opportunities. So I think the key is to ensure that we are equipping particularly the younger generation on how to seize the opportunity. So if I think about my role as a leader at BlackRock, one of the things that I'm actually more excited, and I think is likely to be one of the most impactful thing, is the fact that together with a colleague, Ron Kahn, that many of you may know, we are sponsoring a data science for academy for investors. Effectively, this is about empowering investors, no matter how technical their background, to be competent and confident users of machine learning algorithms, for example.
It may be a step too far for me, but if you're trying to make it accessible to all, perhaps Thomas and Bentley or somebody at BlackRock could actually put the link to that on the chat box for some of our viewers. Going back to what you said about AI, facial recognition, for instance, we've done quite a lot of work on that at the Inclusion Initiative and how you use artificial intelligence for recruitment. Now, what we ended up concluding is there's a lot of good in it and a lot of good in making recruitment, for instance, more objective, but there's also, you do need human oversight for when the machine gets it wrong because of the data, etc. Do you think humans always need to be involved?
I firmly believe that the most powerful combination is human intelligence that leverages artificial intelligence. So it's not an either or, it's really the power is in the combination. And everyone needs to appreciate the limitations that are there in the data that we are using to train those algorithms. So an algorithm will always be as biased the underlying data are. So I think that's a very important component that we should always be very mindful of, whatever the application of AI.
Yeah. The city itself has changed a lot. And when I say the city, I might as well be saying, Wall Street, Shanghai, basically financial and professional services. And that change, there have been various periods of change. One of the last ones on the back of 2008, the financial crisis, but also on the back of Black Lives Matter, on the back of a number of things that have happened. Do you think the city, can you be optimistic about the city and how it's working on diversity and inclusion?
So there is absolutely no doubt that there is more work that we need to do to fully deliver on the diversity, equity, and inclusion agenda. not just as financial services, so the city, Wall Street, to use your expression, but more broadly as a society. Having said this, I do want girls to also get a sense of perspective and, to use your words, of optimism on the topic, because things are changing, and they've certainly changed a great deal, even in the 20 years that I've been in the financial services. And perhaps a good example of this is my own personal story. My grandmother was illiterate. I come from a working class background. I'm the first person to go to university, and I went to Cambridge. And I'm here today as an executive of a global financial firm. So when I started 20 years ago, the city was different in terms of the participation of women and other groups. And the change that we have seen in the last 20 years is a reflection of many things, including, but not limited to, the many initiatives that the industry has undertaken in this space. And one that I like to quote, because it's quite quote unquote local, is a Big City Bright Future. So Big City Bright Future was indeed an initiative that was founded by BlackRock, but the program now includes well over 20 firms. It's operative in 3 distinct regions, and it offers internship to well over 100 students. And the way it works is effectively a 3-week paid internship for inter-university students in the last year before they go to university. The internship gives insight into various industries such as asset management, investment banking, consultancy, etc. And effectively, the program aims to increase access to competitive areas of employment for students from underrepresented backgrounds. And it's important to show that the data that we have, which I believe it refers to last year, is showing the impact that such initiatives are having. So as an example, 88% of the participating students in the program have gone on to go to university. And that compares with about, I think it's 41% for the national average, and something like 26% of students from a free school meals background. If you allow me a little info commercial, if your firm is not participating in the program and you'd like to do so, please reach out.
Perhaps Thomasin would also like to send us the link to that program. What interests me about your story, and partly about the internship, is at the London School of Economics, what we've realized is that we really need to reach down into schools. And the more we've looked, the more down we've gone in terms of age, because so often children start to cut themselves off from their ambitions earlier on. And it's a difficult thing because, you know, appealing to 15, 16-year-olds is difficult. Their minds are all over. They're not already in the sort of, you know, what's going to happen next. But I think in many ways, and especially, you know, talking about social mobility, we have to just ensure we can channel that ambition, don't we?
Absolutely. And I go back to the point that education, even from a very early stage, is absolutely critical to provide the kids with the tools, the role model, and the sense of optimism that is needed to take risk and make a difference to their life.
At the Inclusion Initiative, we have a definition of inclusion. I mean, we are academics, of course, we have definitions for everything. We say that within the firm, diverse voices should be heard in collaborative discussions, and leaders must work to bring the missing voices into the firm to aid its purpose and profitability. What is this your view, and what strikes you about that sentence?
I think it captures all of the key components, and it also helps to highlight the fact that when we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, this is a business imperative, and I think it's important to be all reminded of that.
The business imperative, it does remind me of all the McKinsey studies. I mean, if you have on your LinkedIn, you know, feed, it's endless. McKinsey, Harvard Business, all pointing out how inclusion helps innovation, it helps profitability. And yet it seems to me we still have to convince people that being inclusive of diverse voices leads to higher, more sustainable profits. Why is that? This
is a really hard question to to address, but perhaps I can offer you a perspective from what we are doing specifically at BlackRock around the diversity, equity, and inclusion agenda. So fundamentally, our intent is to embed the diversity, equity, and inclusion mindset into everything that we do. And by this, I mean how we develop talent, how we operate our business, and how we engage outside of BlackRock. And the framework has fundamentally three pillars. I mean, first and foremost, this is about talent and culture. This is all about building, developing, retaining diverse talent, and fostering an inclusive environment where that talent can thrive and deliver for our clients. Training, holding managers accountable for creating a diverse and inclusive environment are all part of this. But it's also important to have what I would call a vibrant ecosystem of employees-led networks. We are very fortunate that we have a number of employees-led networks for women, for veterans, for Black professionals, just to name a few. And they play an absolutely critical role in fostering dialogue, educating, and providing resources for self-education on absolutely key issue. The other element is our societal impact. And here is all about advocating for policy initiatives that support and promote diversity, equity, and inclusion, as well as supporting those through our social impact initiative. And finally, our clients. We want to serve our clients as diversity, equity, and inclusion fiduciaries. This has a number of dimensions from our work in the stewardship space. As an example, one of our key priorities is board quality and effectiveness, of which diversity is obviously an important component. But another dimension that is perhaps less talked about is how we embed diversity, equity, and inclusion into our actual investment decision. And as an investor, obviously, this is a dimension that I'm very familiar to, so I'd be delighted to go into more details if time allows.
Oh, please do, because I think it's one of the most important things, because where the money managers are the ones who can help companies push them into a more sustainable world.
So at BlackRock, we believe that investing with diverse managers, for example, can generate unique and differentiated deal flow and even increase the opportunity for alpha. So we have a formal diverse manager program, recognizing the importance of delivering competitive returns to our clients and increasing partnership with diverse managers. For clarity, we define diverse managers as firm majority owned by women, ethnic minorities, disadvantaged or veterans. The objectives of the program are to increase transparency through data, back we are on the data point, empower an ecosystem through association, and of course, advance measurable commitment. In terms of impact, we continue to expand our diverse manager program. And just to give you a flavor for the level of commitment, out of the 107 billion AUM allocated to third-party managers by BlackRock as of the end of last year, 7 billion was allocated to majority-owned diverse managers and an additional 8 billion to partially owned diverse managers. In addition to the diverse manager program, our manager research team that effectively evaluates the manager we invest in any open architecture mandate also explicitly integrates specific diversity, equity, and inclusion criteria in their own qualitative assessment of the managers. Factors that they would look at include diversity, equity, and inclusion philosophy, approach, compositional diversity, of course, the inclusion culture in relation to the investment process, and talent policies. So in short, when we look at diversity, equity, and inclusion from a BlackRock perspective, it's clearly a priority. And we really aim it to embed it in everything that we do. And we recognize it is indeed a multifaceted journey.
Very multifaceted, and interesting that you include equity in that. Could you tell us a bit more, diversity, equity, and inclusion? Tell us about equity.
I think if we think about the equity dimension, this is about recognizing that the starting point is not the same, and that there are structural barriers to a particular group of talent not being able to fully fulfill their potential. And I think I go back to my point about education and the importance that education has, or programs like Big City, Bright Future, in really making the path to a career in the city more palatable for groups that feel they are underrepresented in financial services.
Now, you've worked all over the world, Hong Kong, Zurich, New York, now London. You were born in Italy. How does being a global citizen help in your work and in being inclusive?
It has been a tremendous privilege to have a truly international career. And we forgot to mention, I'm also married to a German, just to add to the international dimension, a German that I met in Argentina while living in Hong Kong, just make things comfortable. But jokes aside, I believe that having worked in so many countries has offered me a tremendous perspective, a differentiated perspective on challenges, has enabled me to better understand the point of view that others may have. So it has enriched me both professionally, but also at a personal level. I think it has made me a more inclusive reader, also insofar as I can better sympathize and empathize with some of the cultural differences that may lead to people behaving in a certain way, perhaps not speaking up quite as much, just to quote one example. And on a broader level, given the audience, and particularly of today's session, particularly the students, it is truly exciting and truly enriching to be able to see the world and just experience what life in different parts of the world is. So I do recommend it to a lot of the younger audience today.
If I talk about younger audience, and this would be a much younger audience than probably are on this today, but you did write a book about globalization, and you wrote it for children, for primary school children, I believe.
It's the Kid's Pocket Guide to the World that I originally wrote in 2015 and has been subsequently published in a few languages. Is aimed at children in the age group 8 to 11. The reality seems that it's actually read by a broader spectrum of children. Why did I embark on this little adventure? Fundamentally, I was driven by the idea that children receive an awful lot of really negative messages about the world around them. That was true even before COVID, and I think during the pandemic, if anything, it has potentially even exacerbated in terms of a lot of negative message that they would perceive from the world around them. So my intent was to show some of the challenges around globalization, from environmental challenges to inequality, to access to health. In a way, a lot of the topic that you see summarized in the UN SDGs, but to turn them not just in challenges, but also in opportunities that young people can capitalize and build on. So when I'm lucky enough to engage with children in schools around the book, I always tell them that every child has superpowers. Every child can be a superhero. Now, some of them will be superheroes because they might find a cure for cancer. Others may become superheroes because they plant a tree, because they organize recycling in their school. But in many different ways, we can all be superheroes and collectively contribute to addressing some of the challenges that the world has.
I love the idea of bringing globalization, because it's bringing globalization to a much younger audience. And also, by the way, the best way to get, let's say, children of 8 to 11 to read a book is to say it's only for 12 to 15-year-olds. Works very well.
You're talking from experience, I guess.
Absolutely. Now, there is a really interesting study, which I've just seen by Yale professor Kelly Shue, about a large US retail chain. I think there are about 30,000 employees there. And the study noted that women got higher performance ratings than men, yet they were consistently rated as having less leadership potential than men. Now, at the Inclusion Initiative, we talk a lot about confusing competence and confidence. And I would ask you, do you think are we focusing too much on an old style of leadership, the sort of command and control style of leadership?
Well, I'm not familiar with the study you quote, but as a general point, I think it's very important that when we're evaluating talent, whether it's for entry interviews or for promoting people to senior roles, we have a diverse group of individuals involved in that assessment, because they will each bring a different perspective in how we are assessing the individual. And I believe this should lead to better outcome in how we are assessing potential.
And there is a new emphasis, and I think COVID has had a mixed effect on diversity and inclusion. So on the one hand, it has set a number of women back because of the home responsibilities which they had to take on, because a lot of them are in front-facing roles. But it's also, and we'll have to see where the balance lies in the end. It's also helped in that the whole notion of working from home, we've seen that people, and especially now that you can actually measure it, their productivity is just as good working from home anyway. But one of the things that sort of interests me is COVID has also led to what we might call empathetic leadership. So all of a sudden, asking, how are you? And asking, because all of a sudden we don't have secrets, you're on a Zoom call with your, CEO, and behind you walks a dog, a cat, a child, whatever, an older person who you're taking care of. So the notion of actually asking about things like mental health, etc., it's become much more widespread. Do you think that will help with women and for women in their leadership roles?
I think empathetic leaders are proven to be more effective leaders in leading teams over a longer horizon. So I do think that the awareness that COVID has brought about the importance of empathy is going to be a plus all around. There are leaders that are naturally more prone to being empathetic than others. But I think what is important is, once again, goes back to the point of education. As leaders, we all have areas we're very strong on and areas where we're less strong on. It's important, number one, to be aware of those. And number two is, what else can we do? Even if certain things may not come natural to us, we can still, to some extent, learn to plug the gaps and hopefully make people feel more included and thrive.
Am I then allowed to ask you what are, or what might be one of your weaknesses as a leader? What are you working on?
So I'm actually an incredible introvert. So when I did some of the leadership tests, the sort of personality test, I should say, many years ago, I think my results around introvert versus extrovert was so extreme that I had to take it again because they thought it was a language issue. So no, I'm really an introvert. So even events like today are on the side of terrifying for me, because I'm really not. I'm somebody who is very, comfortable in my own space, so to speak. So one thing that I'm constantly working on is precisely pushing myself out of my comfort zone to reach out to more people that may otherwise interpret my quiet and introverted person as lack of interest, which is not the case. And especially with events like today, while, as I said, I find this truly terrifying, it may or may not show. I think the audience can tell this better than I did. But I find these things terrifying, but I think it's important for me to do it, because I believe that by showing examples like mine, working class background, female, introvert, and still having the position that I have, hopefully sends a positive and optimistic message.
I think what you've just said about being an introvert has sent an incredible message to the many people. And in fact, on the chat we have, it does not show, big smile from one person. Yeah, absolutely. And can I say, it doesn't show in the least. But it does prove that you can work on whatever you have and try and improve. You're, since you are, in a way, already we're talking about what advice you would give to your younger self. What advice would you give to a young woman seeking to come into this industry?
My advice would be threefold. Be true to yourself, take risks, and career and more broadly life is a marathon. And let me briefly touch on each of those. Starting with be true to yourself. I think it's absolutely essential to be true to what matters to us as individuals, to what is our sense of purpose. I think this is true for everybody, not just for girls, but it is especially relevant for girls because girls would tend to get a lot of these messages like, be a good girl, or girls don't go into science and into maths. So it's important that girls decide for themselves what really makes them feel happy, what gives meaning and sense to their life without being unduly pressurized by society's pressure. So a very practical advice I would give to young girls is when you feel this pressure because somebody's telling you, be a good girl or do this or do that, just tell to yourself, my life, my show. This is not about being selfish. It's
my
about
life,
going back.
My show. That's very good.
Go back to what really matters to you as a person. On the second point, which is take risk. I think taking risk, going outside of our comfort zone is how we grow as professionals as well as a person. And especially when we are relatively early on in our life, in reality, we can take more risk. It's a bit like in investment. Usually when we give investment advice, we say that the longer your time horizon, the more risk you can take. The same applies to your career. The earlier you are in your career, the more risk you can afford to take. And finally, career is a marathon, not a sprint. So don't think that there is any one job interview or any one piece of work that will make or break it. There are, of course, things that are more important than others. But the good thing about life is that even when you fail, as long as you learn from your failure, you can try again. So again, don't be afraid of taking risk. Time is on your side.
I also think, you mentioned failure. I think, one of many, there are many reasons involved with this, but if you look at Silicon Valley and how it's been a breeding ground for innovation, one of the reasons is failure is perfectly acceptable. You as an entrepreneur have failed with, X company to raise it. And so you go on to the next one and people say, you've already failed. So my God, you must have learned a lot of lessons. Do you think Europe, and I mean, the UK and continental Europe, do you think we are now much more understanding of what failure brings?
I think there is more room culturally for us to accept the notion of failure. And I think the key here is failure, but you learn from failure. And I would say even in the education system, we need to encourage children to take risk, to fail, because this is how they learn. And one of the worry that I have is if we focus too much on exams, that puts a lot of pressure on don't fail, because if you fail an exam, that has a lot of consequences downstream. And while I fully understand why the system is the way it is, I always worry about the subtle consequences of a system that is very exam driven and where failure on exam can have really long-lasting consequences in terms of somebody's ability to go through further education and also culturally the messages that it sends.
It is true, and I have to say, in the UK it's got some of the worst exam-obsessed education system that there is out there. There's some great schools in places like Holland and others where you work on projects together, and it's also about not isolating, because one of the other things that we see with education here is this isolated thing of history is over here, geography is over here, all different things come together, all these different practices, ideas come together when you're working. And so I find it a bit odd the way we separate everything at school.
Yeah, I think the interdisciplinary nature of a lot of jobs, because the reality is it's never just one skill that you need to have to be effective at what you do, is more than one. I think this is potentially going to force more attention being put on precisely what you're describing, which is the ability to work with others, the ability to rely on the expertise of others. So how do you ask the right questions when you're not an expert, but you still need the expertise to solve your problem? So I think education, as many other things, is really in a state of evolution as well, because ultimately we need to ensure that the education systems are fit for the citizens of the 21st century. And actually, to be very concrete about this, one of the areas where I do think that there's going to be, and we're already seeing this, to be fair, more and more attention is financial literacy. So 10, 15 years ago, nobody really talked about financial literacy, but there is now a lot more attention to this. I mean, it is one of the things that is measured as an example by the PISA scores, which are an assessment of competencies for high school students in a number of countries.
We've moved on to financial literacy, so I have to ask you about, because somebody like you doesn't have a huge amount of time, but you've chosen to be a trustee of my bank, which is all about financial literacy. Could you tell me a bit about why you've chosen that one and what does my bank actually do?
Sure. So first of all, my personal motivation is that I believe with privilege, and I'm very privileged and very lucky, comes responsibility. So the reason why I get involved in a number of initiatives, whether it's my teaching at UCL, where all the money goes to then fund scholarship for students from my own teaching, or being a trustee for my bank, is because I firmly believe in giving back. As I've been lucky enough, I think it's very important to give back. Specifically around my bank is a leading financial education charity. The mission is to empower young people to take charge of their future by bringing money to life. So this is all about having high impact, innovative financial education programs for 5 to 25 years old young people. What's especially interesting around my bank is that they've been true innovator in making sure that they collected data and then they had external evaluation of the impact of their program. And what it really shows is that financial education matters. And one of the most interesting examples in my mind is the program that they call the Money House. This is a residential program for young adults that are moving out of care into independent living. Going through this residential program that gives them some of the basic skills around how to manage your finances has proven to make them 3 times less likely to be late on their payments, and has reduced eviction rates by something like 64-65%. And again, for those of you that might be interested, please check out the website. There's a lot of very interesting material there and many ways of getting involved and making a difference.
The government has actually, a few years ago, because I was a trustee of something called the Money Charity, and the government had said that financial literacy should be part of the curriculum. But what's really happened is that a lot of teachers don't know how to teach it. So they rely on my bank, on the Money Charity. And in fact, the Financial Times has just decided to get involved, and this is going to be their charity. And they're bringing together some great minds, great money, and they have obviously the medium to send out a big message to everybody about how important this is. What, if you had 5 minutes with the editor of the FT or the head of this new program at the FT, what would you ask from them?
First and foremost, the good news is that I believe that this is an area where there is great potential for partnership between, and not just in the UK, because this is a common phenomenon that we see when you look at the PISA score in many jurisdictions. But it's a great partnership between governments, the financial industry, media, and education charities. So let's all work together to really deliver for the next generation would be my first ask. The second is we need to be very careful, particularly as technical people, that there is a difference between knowing your financial subject and education. So a lot of the value add that charities like my bank bring is not that they know what a bond or what an equity is. It's how you teach it, how you bring it to life for young people. So I think that's a very important dimension, because if we are not able to explain it in a way that really makes sense and it becomes second nature, we are not going to make a difference. The third is also to be very aware that there is a gender dimension around financial literacy. So again, if we look at the PISA scores, it's evident that there is a gap between boys and girls in financial literacy competencies, even when we adjust for different competence in other areas like general literacy and mathematics. And this is important because, again, we need to ensure that the way we teach and approach financial education does not create a even bigger gender gap in this area.
So let's turn to questions now. And I've been sent some on my phone because people don't always pay attention to, well, they don't always obey when you say, please put them on the chat box. But let's actually turn to the first, one of the ones here that is, how do we get the S in ESG, as in environmental, social governance? How do we get the S to have the same impact as E, environment, which everybody's talking about the environment now?
Look, I think the important point is to ensure that this is all additive. It's not an either or, which I think it's absolutely critical. The challenge with S is that unlike the E, where there is a metric that a lot of investors and other actors can rally around, which is effectively carbon emission intensity. I mean, we can have a discussion whether that intensity is measured vis-a-vis revenue or other things, but fundamentally there is a basic metric that we can align around. When it comes to S, there isn't the equivalent. So S is something where to agree on metrics is a lot more challenging. One framework that I find particularly helpful, though, in the absence of such straightforward metrics, is to use the UN SDGs and actually engage with clients and other investors on what matters to you when it is more of a values discussion, or when it's more of a value discussion, where do you think that the financial materiality is? And then starting from there to then create KPIs that are relevant for that particular UN SDG, and then try to take that into consideration in the decisions that we make.
It's so interesting how, in the end, it does come down to having metrics, having comparable metrics wherever possible. I've got one question here. What has been the main benefit to your professional life from living abroad?
Well, this is a really difficult one, because in reality there have been way too many. But I would say openness of mind has been one, and the second, I've met a lot of really interesting people. So one interesting anecdote of how my children's book came about was really largely inspired by individuals that I met through my travel. And that's just one example of how this has changed my life.
Is the problem for business that inclusion is still often viewed as the responsibility of HR, human resources, rather than the responsibility of every leader?
Well, I would very much hope that the business community at large, and actually more broadly society, is now clear on the point that inclusion is something that concerns everyone, because we all have a role to play. I mean, it's almost, to draw a parallel which is slightly different, but it's like when people think about technology as being something that the IT department should deal with. I mean, technology and how it impacts our work is the responsibility of everyone, and the same applies to inclusion. It is for everyone, by everyone.
For everyone, by everyone. Government. Does government need to be involved to push companies and to make sure there's a level playing field for companies?
There is no doubt that governments and various regulatory agencies have an important role to play in setting standards in many areas. I mean, as always, these things are, one thing is the headline, the general, and the other is the specific.
It seems to me that one of the ways we're changing society, and this is not just inclusion, but it is all of the ESG issues, it is by a new cooperation between government, the private sector. They're coming together, and academia. And it just seems that is almost the only way in which you can have progress happen.
And I would say hallelujah to that, in the sense that one of my favorite saying is actually an African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go with others. And when we are thinking about the big challenges that we are facing collectively, we do need to go together. And what I mean together is all of the sort of government, civil society, and business, because we all have a role to play, and if we play together, we have a much bigger chance of being successful. It's almost like I could rephrase the sentence I use with children in school. I think we need to work together to unleash our inner superheroes ability collectively.
Yeah, that's much more fun as a way of saying that. There's a question on COP26, which is not, but why not take that one? COP26, there are these great hopes about it. It's bringing everybody together, except it turns out it's not bringing absolutely everybody together. But are we going to see major progress on the back of COP26?
Well, we will know soon. My answer as an investor is that regardless of the outcome of any upcoming negotiations, sustainability is an investment risk. And so it is a journey for all of us as investors to continue to find better and better ways by, for example, leveraging data to correctly embed the sustainability dimension in our investment decisions.
Okay. Now, one of the ones I received on my phone is, do you believe in quotas?
Is this specific around sort of gender quotas, I'm assuming?
No, I mean, I think it's about gender, race, sexuality.
So I believe in targets, and I believe in measuring, because what is measured counts. I think in terms of quotas, there are pros and cons. So I would struggle to generalize, but having targets that are measurable targets and public commitments around this is quite important to crystallize the mind and focus the efforts. And as I said, what tends to be measured then has a bigger opportunity of happening because it's a lot more visible.
Now we have a question here from Grace Lorden, the professor and founder of the Inclusion Initiative. And that actually goes straight back to what you've just said about once you measure it, it can have more of an impact. Why, can you offer an explanation as to why there is a glacial, slow pace of progress for women, people of color, and other aspects of diversity where we have data? So she's actually saying data is not making the difference that many of us thought it would make.
Well, I think we need to acknowledge that in many respects, we are at the beginning of this journey. I think the level of attention that is being given to this topic is something that we all need to acknowledge. This is a transformational process, and it will take time. And I agree that we need to do more and more to ensure that the pace is accelerated. But it is one of those areas where I don't think we can just look at the data from the last few years and extrapolate from that, because it's very much the beginning of a journey of a transformational process.
There's a question here about the alpha associated with diverse managers. One of the most important things is going to be measuring the alpha of the diverse managers that you, BlackRock, are investing in, because in the end, others will invest with those managers if they've got the data about how they've outperformed or performed in line with the market, whatever. So are you trying to get will you get the data? Will you share the data, since you are making such a major commitment to diverse fund managers?
So we are definitely collecting the data, and this is part of one of the objectives of the initiative, and also creating an ecosystem to association. We have literally just launched the program last year, but what I would suggest, taking the cue from this question, is that perhaps we can have a session like this in a year's time and review where we got to.
Yeah, it is early days. Absolutely. Now, a question that has been sent to me is about unconscious bias. We're all going through unconscious bias training. Does it work? And you and I have talked before about this issue.
I think you might be more qualified to answer this question than I am, as you've actually looked at some of the evidence from academia on how well unconscious bias training works or not.
Well, I will answer a bit, but but since really people want to hear much more from you, Simona, than from me, I presume BlackRock does unconscious bias training.
So we have done it in the past. Again, I haven't seen the literature that that you referenced in around the effectiveness of this. And training remains one of the areas where we are constantly evolving and expanding our training to be more effective. And I go back to the point of in a lot of these topics around generally this space being a journey and being progress. So I think we will find things that may work more or less, and that we just need to keep learning from it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And just to pick up on your point about what we at the LSE, the Inclusion Initiative has written a paper about this and about how a lot of subconscious bias training doesn't work, but if it's good, it does work. And also the lesson or the message you're sending out in a company, if you finish with all the subconscious bias training, the message you're sending is that this doesn't matter. So there are more aspects to it than others, and it needs to be looked at in more detail. This question, if you could give advice to your 20-year-old self, what would it be? You've talked a bit about that. What would you do differently?
It's a very difficult question, because at the end of the day, as I said earlier, I've made mistakes. I probably learned from it, and it was all part of the journey, so to speak. In terms of what I would do differently, I probably would have gone to Asia sooner. So I was offered the possibility to actually go to China relatively early on in my career, and I didn't take it. I think it would have been tremendously interesting to be in China in the late 1990s in terms of seeing some of the transition and some of the big changes that the country went through, particularly over that period.
Because for BlackRock, you are everywhere, you've got offices all over the world, and it must be a tiny, sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you. It must be a tiny bit difficult, because we were talking about different cultures, and, in Asia, generally, people are less outspoken. It is seen as rude. So how do you manage, because you have a global team?
So it's precisely about that awareness of the differences that each individual bring to the table, some of which may be driven by cultural considerations. So to ensure that they have an outlet to be part of the dialogue, that could be, explicitly asking if you haven't heard from somebody during the meeting, if you have something to add before you close, before you close the meeting, or even in some cases, if you know that there are individuals who are shy or reticent to talk, bring them in from the beginning. So there are quite a few things that can be done, and they should really start with awareness of the fact that we are all different and we tend to participate in different ways.
Sometimes it does come back to that about being an introvert and extrovert, and learning how to manage the relationship with people who are, to make sure that actually they're bringing something to the table and they're being acknowledged for their contribution.
Absolutely. And I also find that it's important that we are not imposing one model of being successful or what contribution may mean, because if everybody has to always just repeat the same thing at the meeting, it's not necessarily a very effective meeting either. So there needs to be a different way of evaluating contribution, which is not purely based on the explicit talking out of meetings. I think there are other ways.
Yes. Evaluation of people and their contribution is an incredibly important part of how you create inclusive cultures. And one person who actually came onto one of our webinars, and he was very interesting because he said he noticed that around when bonuses were being decided, he noticed a lot of the young men would sort of be wandering around near his desk or bumping into him in the corridor. None of the women were. And at a certain point, what he started doing is actually looking at who'd brought in the business And he thought, oh, more women have brought in business than these young men. But they had a different way of being and of showing themselves.
I think this goes back to the point that tendentially women are less likely to ask. So here there are two key takeaways. One is, first of all, women should be, again, not be afraid to ask. So again, take risk. And if you think you are underpaid, this is something that you should definitely raise. Or if you have expectation, again, don't be afraid of sharing those expectations. They may not be met, but there is nothing wrong with having that dialogue. The second consideration is a bit of a echoing of what I was saying earlier about evaluating talent more broadly. It's important that these decisions are always reflective of the input and feedback of multiple people, precisely because we all have biases. We all have blind spots, and the only way we can address that is once again by bringing the perspective of many people.
Simona, thank you for a fascinating talk about, I think, the difficulties actually of being a leader, but the optimism that we can have in the world today. And with leaders like you, I think the world's going in the right place, definitely going in the right place. So thank you for participating.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Not at all. And thank you to the audience for their questions. Although those who send it to my phone, could I ask you, do put it in the chat box in future. Now, I'd like you all to tune in for our next Open Door, Open City webinars. We've got Trevor Phillips, broadcaster, thinker, former head of the Commission for Racial Equality, and Mohammed El-Arian, who's become president of Queen's College, Cambridge, but better known for his time at the IMF and at PIMCO. From all of us here at the Inclusion Initiative, thank you for joining. Thank you to Simona, and goodbye.